I was standing at the very peak of my career in the heart of Seattle when I received a bright red court folder that instantly plunged my entire world into a dark abyss. My name is Camille, a 32-year-old lead architect who spent an entire decade building a reputation for integrity within this competitive industry. The legal documents spread across my mahogany desk accused me of multi-million-dollar fraud and copyright infringement regarding the prestigious Sterling Technology Hub project. My heart stopped as I realized the evidence provided was not just fabricated lies, but actual internal design data, including my private digital signature. Only someone with deep access to my studio's back-end system could have retrieved these encrypted files to frame me so convincingly. The realization hit me like a physical blow when I saw the name of the primary plaintiff was Clarissa Miller. My own sister had weaponized my authentic work to create a counterfeit narrative of corruption that could end my professional life forever. Before I knew it, the office door swung open and there she stood with a triumphant smirk that made my blood run cold. If you have ever been stabbed in the back by the person you trusted most in this world, then subscribe to this channel and share your story in the comments below, because we are about to dive deep into how I turn the tables on my own flesh and blood. Camille, the game is finally over for you. So did you really think your fake genius could hide the fact that you are nothing but a common thief? This betrayal was not a sudden explosion, because it had been festering for many years since the time I was treated like a mere ghost within our family business. My father, Howard Miller, always viewed the Miller Group as his ultimate legacy, while my mother, Sylvia, cared more about maintaining the facade of a perfect high society household than actual justice. My sister Clarissa occupied the vice president office, despite having no real architectural talent or the ability to envision a single structural frame from scratch. I spent nearly a decade working in the shadows of their corporate headquarters, where my innovative designs were routinely handed over to Clarissa to present as her own. Howard would look me in the eye during board meetings, telling me that my contribution was for the greater good of the family name. Sylvia would pull me aside afterward to remind me that as the younger sibling, I had a moral duty to support my sister's public image. They did not just favor her, but actively participated in a systematic scheme to gas-print my work into her portfolio under the Miller Group brand. I remember clearly when I designed the blueprints for the Downtown Library project, which was supposed to be my breakthrough moment as a professional architect. Clarissa took those sketches from my desk overnight and stood before the city council the next morning claiming every creative choice belonged to her brilliant mind. When I confronted Howard in his private office about this blatant theft, he merely shrugged while lighting a cigar and told me to stop being so sensitive about credit. My parents treated my labor like a communal resource that Clarissa was entitled to harvest whenever she felt her own reputation was starting to slip. This environment taught me that my worth was only recognized as long as I remained a silent engine driving my sister's unearned success. The final straw came during a heated argument in the dining room when Sylvia demanded I apologize to Clarissa for making her feel insecure about her lack of technical skills. I realized then that my presence in that house was suffocating my potential while feeding a monster of entitlement that would eventually turn against me. When I finally decided to pack my belongings to start my own studio, I thought I was leaving all the toxicity behind in that oppressive mansion. However, I made a critical mistake by bringing several junior associates and administrative assistants with me because I believed they were loyal to my vision. Clarissa had been the one managing the human resources department at Miller Group for years, meaning she knew the personal histories and financial vulnerabilities of every person I hired. She understood exactly how our internal security protocols functioned because she was the one who helped establish the baseline for our digital filing system. My sister did not just watch me leave with anger, but she felt deeply humiliated that the person she used to exploit was now a direct competitor. As Miller Group began to struggle without my constant stream of fresh ideas, Clarissa's resentment transformed into a calculated obsession with my professional destruction. She maintained clandestine contact with my staff members, using her old influence to plant the seeds of the internal breach that led to my current legal nightmare. My departure served as the spark that ignited her desperate need to prove that I could never truly survive without the family's shadow looming over me. Clarissa watched from the sidelines as I secured prestigious contracts, while our parents' company faced declining revenue and public irrelevance for the first time in decades. Howard constantly compared our financial statements during the few holidays I attended, which only served to sharpen Clarissa's desire to see me stripped of everything I built. She knew the names of my private servers and the specific encryption patterns I favored, because we had shared the same technical infrastructure for a significant portion of our careers. This intimate knowledge of my professional DNA gave her the keys to my kingdom before I even realized there was a war being waged against my name. I was so focused on my future success that I failed to see how the ghosts of my past were gathering at my door with the intent to burn my legacy to the ground. 3 years after establishing my independence, I finally secured the massive project with Mr. Sterling, but I had no idea that every single step I took was being watched from the shadows. My client, a visionary tech billionaire named Marcus Sterling, chose my studio because he wanted a design that broke away from the stagnant traditions of the past. This partnership was a monumental victory for me, while it simultaneously pushed the Miller Group toward the edge of total bankruptcy. Howard struggled to keep his legacy afloat as clients abandoned his outdated methods in favor of the modern efficiency my team provided at every turn. Clarissa watched her inheritance vanish with every contract I signed, while her resentment grew into a meticulously planned operation of corporate espionage. My parents tried to call me several times to demand a seat at the table, but I remained firm in my decision to keep my business entirely separate from their influence. My studio flourished because I built it on a foundation of absolute integrity and professional transparency during those first few years of operation. I spent most of my hours focusing on the complex technical requirements of the Sterling project, while leaving the administrative tasks to my expanding team. This intense focus on architectural excellence caused me to overlook the subtle shifts in the personal lives of my employees. Clarissa recognized this weakness immediately because she understood that my passion for design often blinded me to the movements within my own office. She began employing a private investigator to monitor my daily schedule and identify any staff members who might be vulnerable to financial persuasion. My sister sought a way to infiltrate my inner circle without ever having to step foot inside my building or face me directly. The breakthrough Clarissa needed came when she identified a junior accountant in my firm who was struggling with mounting medical debts for his family. She approached him through a third party to offer a solution to his financial problems in exchange for a few innocuous internal documents. This mole within my studio began collecting my early sketches and detailed financial schedules without ever raising a single red flag in our daily meetings. I was so preoccupied with the structural integrity of the Sterling hub that I failed to notice the silent theft of my intellectual property. The mole provided Clarissa with copies of my private digital signatures and the specific timestamps of every major project milestone we achieved. My sister gathered this data not to build something of her own, but to prepare a devastating narrative of fraud that she could use when the time was right. Clarissa and Howard were desperate to see me fail because my success served as a constant reminder of their own professional irrelevance in the current market. They watched from their shrinking headquarters as the Sterling project gained national attention, while their own revenue streams continued to dry up completely. My sister used the information from the internal mole to create a distorted version of my financial records that made legitimate transactions look like illegal kickbacks. She was building a trap that relied on my own authentic data to make her future accusations appear irrefutable to any external investigator or judge. I continued to work with a sense of pride while believing that my hard work was the only shield I needed against the world. Marcus Sterling visited my office several times to express his confidence in my vision, while we finalized the details of the multi-million-dollar construction phase. Camille, this design will redefine the Seattle skyline for the next century, he said, while reviewing the latest structural renderings on my desk. I thanked him for his trust without realizing that Clarissa was already using her stolen information to draft a letter to his legal department. My sister knew that the best way to destroy me was to sever my relationship with the man who made my independence possible. She waited patiently for the moment when my studio was most financially exposed before she decided to pull the trigger on her carefully constructed trap. "We are going to take back everything she thinks she earned," Howard whispered to Clarissa during one of their late-night strategy sessions at the family estate. 6 months later, at the grand opening celebration of my new office headquarters, my family arrived with fake smiles that poorly concealed a calculated plot to destroy everything I had built. I had invited Marcus Sterling along with several high-profile investors to witness the expansion of my studio into the premier architectural firm in Washington state. Howard approached me early in the evening with an uncharacteristic warmth, while Sylvia stayed close to his side to reinforce the illusion of a sudden family reconciliation. My sister Clarissa remained unusually quiet during the initial toasts as she drifted toward the perimeter of the room to observe the flow of our internal security. I believed their presence was a genuine attempt to bury the hatchet, so I allowed myself to lower my guard for the first time in many years. Howard leaned in close to suggest a potential collaboration between our two companies, which he framed as a way to preserve the Miller legacy through mutual support. While Howard kept me occupied with his long-winded proposal about a joint venture, Clarissa was busy coordinating with the junior intern she had successfully bribed weeks earlier. This intern had been granted temporary access to the project management suite to assist with the digital presentations being projected throughout the event. Clarissa provided him with a specialized data extraction device, disguised as a standard thumb drive to plug into the main terminal, while the rest of my team was distracted by the festivities. This malicious hardware was designed to bypass our primary firewall, to copy my encrypted electronic signatures, along with every raw financial transaction recorded during the Sterling construction phase. I was so busy discussing structural logistics with my clients that I failed to notice the subtle red light flickering on the back of the workstation near the refreshment table. The intern moved with practiced precision to ensure the data transfer remained undetected by our automated security logs, while the party reached its peak volume. Sylvia grabbed my hand to pull me away from a group of potential contractors so she could lecture me about the importance of family loyalty in the face of professional rivalry. She used her softest tone to remind me that Clarissa was struggling with the pressures of the declining Miller Group, while I seemed to be thriving without any effort at all. My mother told me that a good daughter would never let her own sister drown in failure when she possessed the life raft of a multi-million-dollar contract. "You have achieved so much, Camille, but you must remember that being a Miller means putting your family's needs before your personal pride," she whispered while blocking my view of the administrative offices. I felt a familiar wave of guilt wash over me because she knew exactly which emotional buttons to press to keep me from questioning their sudden appearance. Howard nodded in agreement while gesturing toward Clarissa, who was now returning from the back hallway with a look of quiet triumph on her face. By the time the last guest had departed my studio, Clarissa had successfully retrieved the thumb drive containing the digital keys to my entire professional identity. She now possessed the raw materials needed to fabricate a paper trail of embezzlement by merging my authentic signatures with the distorted financial records she had already prepared. My parents continued to play their parts by hugging me goodbye, while promising that we would discuss the details of Howard's partnership proposal later that week. I felt a sense of relief thinking that the war between us was finally coming to an end through a peaceful compromise. Clarissa did not say much as she walked toward their waiting car, but the way she clutched her handbag told me she was holding something far more valuable than a simple accessory. I stood in my silent office feeling proud of the evening's success, without realizing that my own biological sister had just stolen the foundation of my future. Howard looked back at the glowing lights of my building and remarked to Sylvia that my stubbornness would finally be my downfall once the legal proceedings began. Clarissa was already laptop-bound in the back seat to verify the integrity of the stolen files, while she began the process of aligning the timestamps with her counterfeit narrative. They had utilized my moment of greatest joy to plant the seeds of my ultimate public humiliation with surgical precision. My sister knew that with my electronic signature on her fake documents, the burden of proof would fall entirely on my shoulders to explain transactions I never actually authorized. I spent the remainder of the night reviewing my project timelines while feeling a false sense of security that would be shattered within a matter of days. The trap was now fully set, with my own digital fingerprints serving as the primary evidence against my character and my career. Exactly 15 days later, a calculated media campaign erupted across every major news outlet, transforming my professional reputation into a public villain within the Seattle architectural community. Clarissa had not merely filed a lawsuit, but she also hired specialized black market PR firms to saturate the internet with headlines labeling me as a young architect who defrauded a billionaire. These articles featured leaked documents that appeared remarkably authentic because they contained the digital signatures stolen during the office opening party weeks ago. The sheer volume of negative press created such a public outcry that the court felt compelled to expedite the legal proceedings to prevent further social instability. I woke up on a Tuesday morning to find that my studio's corporate bank accounts had been frozen by a preliminary court order, pending a full investigation into my financial records. This sudden financial paralysis meant I could no longer pay my subcontractors or maintain the daily operations required to keep the Sterling project on schedule. Marcus Sterling found himself in an impossible position as his board of investors began to question the transparency of the entire hub development project. My primary client was being pressured to distance himself from my studio to protect his own corporate interests from the fallout of my supposed criminal activities. I tried to reach out to his office several times, but his legal team blocked every attempt at direct communication to maintain a safe distance from the growing scandal. Clarissa used this period of isolation to plant further seeds of doubt by claiming that I had been planning to sell his proprietary designs to foreign competitors for months. The media circus outside my office made it impossible for me to enter the building without being swarmed by reporters demanding a confession for crimes I never committed. I felt the walls of my professional world closing in as my loyal clients began to cancel their appointments one by one out of fear for their own reputations. My father, Howard, chose this moment of extreme vulnerability to schedule an emergency family meeting at the old Miller estate to discuss what he called a graceful exit strategy. He sat at the head of the dining table with a thick stack of legal papers, while Sylvia looked at me with a mixture of practiced pity and disappointment. Clarissa leaned against the fireplace with a smug expression as she watched her parents perform their roles in this final act of corporate theft. Howard pushed a contract across the table that demanded the immediate transfer of the Sterling project rights to the Miller Group in exchange for their help in settling the lawsuit quietly. My father claimed that this was the only way to resolve the matter internally before the federal authorities became involved in the investigation of my signatures. "Camille, you must sign these papers to save what remains of our family name, because your reckless ambition has put us all at risk of public ruin," he declared with a cold authority. I looked at the documents and realized that my family had orchestrated every single detail of this crisis to force me back into a position of total subservience. Sylvia added that they were willing to forgive my supposed transgressions if I agreed to return to the Miller Group under Clarissa's direct supervision for the next 5 years. My mother insisted that they were my only true allies left in the world, because the public had already decided I was guilty of massive corporate fraud. I finally understood the terrifying depth of the betrayal when I noticed a familiar intern from my office standing in the hallway behind Clarissa. The realization that I had been harboring a mole within my own inner circle made my blood run cold as I remembered all the sensitive conversations he must have recorded. I stood up from the table without touching the pen Howard had provided, while my hands trembled with a combination of rage and profound disappointment. The isolation became absolute when my own legal counsel advised me to consider the Miller Group's offer because the evidence against me seemed nearly impossible to debunk in a court of law. I spent the next 48 hours alone in my apartment while the news continued to cycle through the fabricated story of my professional downfall. My sister had successfully turned my greatest achievement into a weapon of mass destruction that was now threatening to erase a decade of my hard labor. Every person I had helped or mentored during my career seemed to have vanished into the shadows to avoid being associated with my tarnished brand. I was no longer just an architect fighting a lawsuit, but I had become a pariah in the city I had worked so hard to build and improve. The silence of my phone was more deafening than the loudest protest, as I realized that the people I called family were the ones who truly wanted to see me destroyed. Surrounded by a wall of public contempt and isolation, I reached out to my IT specialist named Grant, but the search for the truth proved to be much more difficult than we had ever imagined. We spent the first few nights in a cramped basement office trying to trace the origin of the leaked documents that were currently destroying my reputation in the Seattle news. Grant could not identify the source IP address immediately because Clarissa had utilized a sophisticated virtual private network to mask every digital footprint left by her hackers. The frustration mounted as we hit one encrypted dead end after another, while the clock ticked toward my next mandatory court appearance. We stayed awake for 72 consecutive hours, reviewing thousands of lines of server logs to find any anomaly that occurred during the grand opening celebration. Our breakthrough finally arrived when Grant discovered a faint trace of a foreign device that had been plugged into our project management terminal at exactly 9:10 that evening. This confirmed my suspicion that the breach was not a remote hack, but a physical infiltration carried out right under my nose during the party. While Grant focused on the technical forensics of the server breach, my lead attorney named Vance Higgins began digging into the complex financial web surrounding the Miller Group. Vance discovered that Clarissa had established several shell companies based in the Cayman Islands to funnel large sums of money away from Howard's failing business. These offshore entities were being used to fund a series of ghost transactions that were designed to look like illegal kickbacks paid directly to my personal accounts. My sister had been meticulously layering these financial movements for months to ensure that the paper trail would appear irrefutable to any external forensic accountant. Vance showed me the bank records which revealed how the Miller Group's remaining assets were being drained to pay for the black market PR firms attacking my name. I felt a surge of adrenaline as we finally started to see the mechanical skeleton of the conspiracy that my family had built to reclaim my professional success. We realized that proving the existence of these shell companies would be the key to shattering the credibility of the entire lawsuit filed against me. The investigation almost ended in a total disaster when the internal mole I had identified earlier attempted to destroy the primary hard drive containing the original server logs. I had returned to the studio late at night to collect some additional backup tapes when I caught the intern hovering over the main workstation with a high-powered industrial magnet. He panicked when the lights flickered on and tried to physically smash the drive against the edge of the mahogany desk to erase the evidence of his betrayal. I managed to intervene just in time to wrestle the hardware away from him before any irreversible damage could be done to the magnetic platters inside. We immediately locked the office doors and called the authorities to ensure that he could not escape or contact Clarissa to warn her about our discovery. This moment of physical confrontation made me realize that my family was willing to resort to criminal destruction to keep their secrets hidden from the light of justice. The intern eventually broke down under questioning and admitted that Clarissa had promised him a massive payout once the Sterling project was successfully transferred back to the Miller Group. Grant spent the next morning carefully extracting the remaining data from the drive to prove that the timestamps on Clarissa's evidence had been digitally altered after the fact. We found the specific script used to merge my electronic signature onto the counterfeit contracts, which served as the definitive smoking gun we needed for the trial. Every hour of exhaustion and every moment of doubt seemed to disappear as we watched the truth slowly reassemble itself on the monitor in front of us. Vance Higgins began drafting a countersuit that would not only clear my name, but would also expose the systematic fraud committed by Howard and Clarissa. We knew the battle was far from over because my parents still possessed significant influence within the local judicial system and the media. I looked at the decrypted files and felt a cold sense of resolve because I was no longer the victim they had intended to crush under their feet. We had the evidence required to turn the tide of the war, and I was ready to face my family in open court without any further fear or hesitation. At 9 o'clock during the confrontation hearing, Clarissa walked into the courtroom with the demeanor of a victor who was ready to deliver the final killing blow to my career. She sat confidently at the plaintiff's table while Howard and Sylvia occupied the front row of the gallery to provide a silent display of parental disapproval. Clarissa's attorney began the session by launching an aggressive counterattack, alleging that I had fabricated all the digital evidence to maliciously frame my own sister. He bombarded me with a series of sharp questions regarding my professional ethics, while suggesting that my success was built entirely on the trade secrets I stole from the Miller Group. I remained calm in the witness stand as I looked directly at Clarissa, who was smirking while her legal team painted me as a desperate fraud. The atmosphere in the room felt heavy with the weight of the fabricated headlines that had been circulating throughout Seattle for the past several weeks. Vance Higgins waited for the prosecution to finish their opening statement before he stood up to present our first piece of undeniable physical evidence. He produced the forensic report on the malicious thumb drive that Grant had successfully analyzed after the frantic struggle in my studio. We also called the former intern to the stand, who had decided to testify against Clarissa after realizing the legal severity of his previous actions. The young man admitted under oath that my sister had provided him with the device to steal my electronic signatures during the office opening party. Clarissa's expression shifted from arrogance to a look of panicked disbelief as the witness detailed the specific instructions he received from her via encrypted messages. My attorney played the audio recordings we recovered from the intern's phone, which clearly identified Clarissa's voice coordinating the data theft. The judge leaned forward with a look of intense interest while Howard leaned over to whisper something urgent into Sylvia's ear. The turning point of the morning occurred when Marcus Sterling entered the courtroom and requested permission to deliver a personal statement regarding our professional partnership. He announced to the stunned audience that he had been privately collaborating with me to monitor Clarissa's suspicious movements for several months. Marcus explained that he had noticed inconsistencies in the Miller Group's recent bids, which suggested they were using my proprietary data to underwrite their own struggling projects. He provided the court with a series of internal emails that he had gathered with my assistance to document Clarissa's attempts to sabotage our construction timeline. This revelation shattered the prosecution's narrative because it proved that I was never working in isolation or acting with fraudulent intent. Clarissa tried to stand up to object, but her own lawyer pulled her back down as the momentum of the hearing shifted completely in my favor. Vance Higgins then revealed the final piece of the puzzle by presenting the financial records of the shell companies established in the Cayman Islands. These documents proved that Clarissa had been draining the Miller Group's remaining capital to fund the black market PR firms that attacked my reputation. We showed the direct link between these offshore accounts and the fabricated transactions that were used to freeze my studio's corporate bank accounts. The evidence displayed on the courtroom screens made it clear that Clarissa had been orchestrating a systematic campaign of corporate espionage and character assassination. Sylvia looked away in shame while Howard slumped into his seat as the reality of their daughter's criminal behavior was laid bare for the court to see. My sister's composure collapsed entirely when the judge asked her to explain why her personal digital signature was found on the Cayman Bank authorization forms. As the hearing reached its conclusion, the judge issued an immediate order to unfreeze my studio's assets and dismissed all the charges filed against my name. Clarissa was ordered to remain in the courtroom to face a new set of criminal allegations ranging from identity theft to grand larceny. I felt a profound sense of justice as I watched the bailiffs move toward the plaintiff's table to take my sister into custody for further questioning. Howard and Sylvia attempted to reach out to me as I walked toward the exit, but I moved past them without acknowledging their presence. Marcus Sterling met me in the hallway to shake my hand, while affirming his continued support for our upcoming project milestones. I realized then that my career was no longer a ghost of the Miller Group, but a powerful entity that had survived the ultimate test of fire. The truth had finally been spoken in a place where lies could no longer survive, and I was ready to rebuild my legacy from the ashes of their betrayal. As the sound of the judge's gavel echoed through the silent courtroom, I did not feel the surge of victory I had expected, but only a bitter emptiness regarding my biological connection to the people across the aisle. Clarissa was immediately sentenced to several years in federal prison for multiple counts of fraud and the illegal misappropriation of high-level technological assets. Howard and Sylvia sat frozen in their seats, while the legal reality of their daughter's crimes began to dismantle the remaining fragments of their social standing. The Miller Group collapsed entirely within weeks of the verdict because every major investor withdrew their support once the systematic corporate espionage was exposed to the public. My parents were forced to file for total bankruptcy and sell the historic family estate to pay off the massive debts from their failed projects. They moved into a modest apartment on the outskirts of the city, while the legacy Howard spent decades building disappeared into a pile of liquidation documents. I watched from a distance as the local news reported on the final auction of their personal belongings to satisfy the demands of the court's restitution order. Although I had successfully cleared my name in the eyes of the law, it took several grueling months to restore the damaged morale of my dedicated studio team. Many of my employees had suffered through the media harassment and the financial uncertainty of the freezing order without ever losing their faith in my leadership. I focused on rebuilding our internal culture by establishing new security protocols that ensured a similar breach could never happen again in the future. Marcus Sterling remained a steadfast partner throughout the recovery process, while helping me secure new contracts that reinforced the studio's position as a leader in innovative design. We eventually completed the Sterling Hub project on schedule, which served as a monumental testament to our resilience in the face of absolute betrayal. My professional reputation slowly healed as the architectural community recognized that my success was the result of hard work rather than fraudulent manipulation. I spent many late nights in the office reflecting on the cost of my independence while knowing that I had finally earned the right to stand on my own. I stood before the Seattle coastline on a quiet morning to watch the fog roll over the dark water while I finally made peace with the end of my family history. I returned to my studio that afternoon to personally supervise the installation of a brand new sign above the main entrance of the building. I decided to officially change my last name on all corporate documents to remove the Miller identity that had been used as a weapon against my integrity. My studio was no longer a shadow of a failing dynasty, but it had become a completely separate entity that reflected my own values and my own vision. I looked at the new logo and felt a profound sense of liberation because the ghost of Howard's legacy no longer haunted the hallways of my creative space. The silence from my parents was a gift that allowed me to focus on the people who had actually stood by me during my darkest hours of professional isolation. I was starting a new life where my worth was measured by my contributions to the world rather than my obedience to a toxic family structure. The most vital lesson I learned throughout this traumatic experience is that professional boundaries must be maintained even within the closest personal relationships to protect one's integrity. Trust is a valuable currency that should be earned through consistent actions rather than granted blindly based on the simple accident of biological shared heritage. I realized that being overly focused on my technical expertise had blinded me to the necessity of vigilant administrative and personnel management within my own organization. A leader must possess the courage to investigate any suspicious activity, regardless of who might be involved, to prevent a minor leak from becoming a catastrophic flood. True independence requires the strength to cut ties with anyone who uses your emotional vulnerabilities as a tool for their own selfish gain or professional advancement. Protecting your vision means building a fortress of transparency that can withstand the most calculated attempts at sabotage from both strangers and kin alike. Thank you for following Camille's journey through the storm of betrayal and her ultimate rise to true professional independence. This story serves as a reminder that your authentic hard work will always be your strongest shield against those who try to steal your light. What would you have done if you found a mole in your own inner circle? Please share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe for more stories about resilience and corporate justice. Don't scroll past this part just yet, as I believe that after witnessing everything Camille has gone through, each of us is left with conflicting thoughts about what we call family bonds and betrayal. Looking at Camille's journey, I've realized a harsh truth. Sometimes the greatest obstacle standing between you and success isn't a competitor out there, but rather those of the same bloodline. My perspective is clear. Kindness without boundaries is merely weakness. The way Camille's parents or Clarissa used the name of family to suppress her isn't love, it is tyranny, masquerading as kinship. In today's professional society, trust must be built on a foundation of legal clarity and transparency, even among family members. Never let the family label blur your right to protect your legitimate professional achievements. Camille chose the most painful way to grow total severance, but it was the only salvation for her self-respect. Thank you for listening until the very end of this story. If you were in Camille's shoes, would you choose to remain silent just to maintain so-called family harmony? Or would you fight back decisively to protect your career? If you have a different perspective or a more humane way to handle this, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss our next profound life lessons. Thank you, and see you soon.